Okay, welcome to this section of the course dealing with AWS Glue. Now in the previous lecture we spoke about the process of ETL, extract, transform, and load. So when we went from DynamoDB to S3 using the data pipeline, we extracted from DynamoDB and loaded into S3, but we really didn't do any transformation. It still had that kind of JSON database format. And previously, when we used Kinesis Firehose, we also had the extraction and the loading, but no transforming when we went directly to S3 from a timed interval frame using Kinesis Firehose. So the big benefit of AWS Glue is this transformability. We can transform these different data formats like JSON or this DynamoDB format into a CSV or a more usable format when we want to do our graphing and analysis. So this is the benefit of AWS Glue. Now, of course, the tool has much more functionality than that you can read about in the resources, but that's primarily what we're going to be concerned about for this part of the course. Now, AWS Glue is basically two different applications in one. The first part's a data crawler. So when we have our data in the format we don't want it in the S3 bucket, we can crawl it to index it, then it'll recognize what format it is currently in and what format transform options you have, add it to this data catalog, and then we can move on to go into Amazon Athena, which is a more complicated and expensive analytics tool, or what we're going to do, Amazon QuickSight. So once we have a catalog, we have the options to move into any of these other tools that'll give us further information on graphing and analytics. Now, the second part of the AWS Glue tool we're going to use is after we finish crawling, let's do our transformation. So after we got our data catalog, now we can do our transformation into a more usable format, which for us is pretty much going to be CSV, which is a comma delimited space value format. Typically what you would see in an Excel spreadsheet. And this bottom graph has kind of a documentation of the whole process. We have our AWS IoT or device information JSON packet coming in. In this example, it's Kinesis Firehose into S3, but remember, we're also doing it from AWS IoT into DynamoDB into S3. So we have two options here that we've covered in the course. Now that we have a data catalog, we can do our ETL, but mainly our transform method from either that database or that straight JSON kind of format, transform it to a comma delimited value format, CVS format, and send it back to S3 in the format we want. Now that it's back in S3, I'm going to show you in a coming lecture how we can use Amazon QuickSight, part of the free suite of tools that AWS provides in the free tier. And then once we have it in this transform format, we can do our analyzation and graphing with Amazon QuickSight. So you can see it's quite a useful tool. The only caveat that I'll give you, which we'll talk about, is that this tends to be a little bit more expensive, so it might cost us to crawl like 20 cents and then to transform an additional 20 cents. But I'll monitor that over this example and we'll see what it turns out being, and hopefully it's less money by the time you see this course. Okay, welcome back to the course. Now we're going to talk about specifically getting into AWS Glue, and I'll divide this into two parts. First, let's crawl our data that we just got out of DynamoDB using that data pipeline. Then after we crawl our data and Amazon uses its intelligence to put it into a recognizable format through its Python Hadoop AI, we'll use that data table it created and then transform the data from this kind of database JSON looking file into something closer we really want as our end product, which is this comma separated value file that we can put into QuickSight and use with more commercially available software, because CSV files are commonly used throughout the industry. So obviously we're much better dealing with the CSV file than we are trying to manipulate a messed up Dynamo specific file or even a JSON file. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call up AWS Glue. And again, for this lecture, we're just going to do a crawling of the file we got from our data pipeline and turn it into a recognizable format. So I'm going to go ahead and add a table using the crawler. I don't want to do it manually. So let's enter the crawler name. Let's just call this our crawler. And we're going to use it from the S3 data store. We have the option of a JDBC or S3 data store. So we want to use S3, and we want to crawl a path in my account. And here's the path we want to crawl. And we're going to crawl that path we just got from our data pipeline out of that DynamoDB. So if you remember, that's in test bucket 115. We ran a few data pipelines, but I want to run the latest one, which is the latest dump I got yesterday right here. So let's go ahead and select that. So this is the path that it's going to crawl and then try to get some recognizable file format out of here. So let's move on. I don't want to add another data store. Now, as far as IAM policies, I'm going to use one I already have. So I'm going to choose it, and this is the one I want to use, this AWS S3 Glue role. And you can check out what your role looks like if you just decide to use the default policy, but I just want to make sure I have full S3 access and full Glue access. That's really all I care about. As long as I can access my S3 bucket coming in for the database crawler and going out to my database table with the recognized structure, I have to have access to everything I'm going to need for that, which is S3 on both ends and then the Glue crawler. Okay, so let's go on to next. Now I know that policy works. I got two options here. I can run it on a schedule just like with the data pipeline, or I can run it on demand. I just want to run it once because just like data pipeline, I'm going to get charged, 5 to 7 cents every time I run it. I think last time I ran 3 to data pipelines, they were like 7 cents each. And the crawler will be 7 cents, and I think the transform is going to be another 7 cents. So it might be like 14 or 15 cents. Okay, now as far as choose a database, we can just make our own. It doesn't really matter. Call it whatever you want. RDB crawler. Just a database is holding an intermediate step for our data structure. That's why it creates that. I don't need a prefix, so I'll go ahead and hit next. And this just reviews everything we've done, so I'll go ahead and finish this. And now we're ready to crawl. So these are all my old crawlers. I'm just going to hit my new crawler, select it, and then run crawler. And this is going to take like 5 minutes, so I'll pause this and come back, and then we'll look at what we created. Okay, it finally finished after about 4 minutes. So you see it created 2 tables. It'll create a new table whenever it detects a change in metadata. And we do have a change in metadata. And I'll show you some common pitfalls that can be made when we do our transform in the next lecture. So let's go to the next lecture, and now that we have our data table, we can work to transform it. Okay, welcome back to the second part of the AWS Glue lecture. Now in the last lecture, we created our crawler, and our crawler crawled the DynamoDB data we got out of our data pipeline and created some data tables. So now that we have the data tables, let's examine those structures and see what good information we can extract from them to get that comma-separated value we want. So let's start our ETL job. And again, for this part, it's really the T we're doing, which is the transform. So I'm going to do jobs. Add a job. We're going to call it our transform job. Choose a role. I'm going to use that same role we did earlier. It has all the access we need, Glue access from our first part of the data crawler. Now we have 3 options for job runs. We can do an AWS script, an existing script I've already written, or a new script that I'm going to write. I'm going to use a proposed script. I'm going to show you why. Path where the script is stored. Why don't we go ahead and stick it in a bucket I created for this? We'll call it Glue Bucket 116. I've already got it created and it's ready to go. I'm also going to have a temporary directory. You're not going to see this file because it's going to create it, and then when it's done, it's going to delete it. But I'm also going to stick that in Glue Bucket 116. I don't need to mess with any of these advanced properties for bookmarking or script libraries. But this is all done in Python and Hadoop, so I can tell you whoever did this application in AWS is clearly a data science Python guy or team. All right, so this is the one we want because this is the tables we just created, and it was able to successfully classify this as JSON notation, JavaScript object notation. So that's good. If it would have said something else like unknown, we would have had more problems to deal with. But it knows it's JSON, so that's a really good sign. Okay, right here we do not want to use the tables from our data catalog because we don't really know what those tables look like other than we have 2 different chunks of metadata. I don't want to dig through them and see if they've got it correct or not. I just rather manually create it using their tool. So I'm going to create tables in my data target. So I, again, use these Java drivers or Amazon S3 to store my data. I'm going to use that. And I don't want it, remember, we're getting it now. It's recognized as JSON format, even though it's not correct JSON format. We want to make it into comma-separated values. For these commercial tools and using QuickSight, Excel, whatever we want to do with it, CSV is going to be a really good choice. I don't want any compression. And for the target path, I'll also stick it in that Glue 116 bucket. All right, going on to next. Okay, this is the fun part. And when I say fun, I mean kind of weird and buggy part. We created 2 different data structures where we should only have one. And here's why. We have this Envio data and Enviro data. So how did that happen? So if we go over here, we seemed I misnamed it Envio data, went back and changed it to Enviro data. So you can see all the listings but the first one are under Enviro data coming from our database to data pipeline dumped into S3. So certainly Enviro data is the structure I want to turn from JSON or DynamoDB JSON into CSV. So that's important to know where we go back here and manipulate this tool that we can do that. So I don't want the timestamp coming here, and I don't want the device ID coming out of here. I want everything in this structure. And the order of the structure you can see from hovering over this is time, temperature, humidity, device. It's not the order I put it in as, but it'll still be much easier once it's in comma separated value CSV file extension to extract it out of there as CSV and then put it into QuickSight. So that's fine, but we're still going to have to drill down here and get the structure out of here. And these are all the possible options for CSV. We only need 4 of them, remember? We only need that timestamp, device ID, humidity, and temperature. So I'm going to get rid of a lot of these, but let's do this part first from our JSON file, going over to our CSV file. So let me dig down in here. So this thing can be pretty buggy. Sometimes you have to expand these to expand this structure. But remember, this is the structure you want, EnviroData, the correct structure. So finally I got it expanded by monkeying around with this data. So now I know the structure is time, temperature, humidity, and device ID. So I can fill that out right here. So I got to correctly assign these. There's time, EnviroData, temperature, humidity, and device ID. Again, not the right order, but close enough for our purposes. We can rearrange it when we get to do the analysis. So from there, we'll just go next. And this gives us our job parameters. Transform job, it's using Python to do that. We can do our own script. I think you probably do our own script in a different language, like maybe Java, but this one's obviously Python. And we can go ahead with this, finish it. And from here, it actually gives us the Python script, so you can check that out. You can see it's a little bit complicated, but if you want to go in and change it or use your own script, you can do that. Now once that's done, we just need to go to run the job and go ahead and run it. And this one's going to run for a while. This one also takes about 5 minutes, so I'll wait for this to finish. Okay, it finally appears to be finished. Again, it took about 5 minutes. It looks like it outputted correctly to our glue bucket 116 as I specified. Let's go check that out in S3. Open up the glue bucket. It's saying it's empty, but again, that's just because we haven't refreshed it. Let's be hopeful. All right, there it is. That's what we're looking for. The run file. The run file is the one that contains what we want. Let's double check that. Okay, great. This is looking a lot better. So we have our headers over here, time, temperature, humidity, and device ID. Here's our string time, number temperature, number humidity, and string our device. So we're doing really well. This is a lot closer to what we want as far as a comma separated value that we can use for Microsoft Excel, or in our case, AWS QuickSight. So we're way further transforming our file to what we need. We just have to do a little bit more change, which you can try to do from the manifest, but we can definitely do with some of the built-in functions of AWS QuickSight. So let's move on in the lecture series and explore what else we can do.